Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah barakatuh to some of you and peace out to the rest of you. I've tried to record this several times and keep it short. I'm not really sure I'll be able to. But let me go ahead and put this out there for you. Yeah, hit the share button because this is important, of course. It's more important than who I am. But this is about terms under which men and women can defend each other. This is relevant, of course, to the Goldensphere. This is something that the wider black community could get on board with, but I'm going to be honest. It's the matriarch in a gynocracy that's not going to listen to this. It's not the bros. It's not black men that are going to outright dismiss this. But this could work in the event that the matriarchs and the gynocrats ever decided to grow some sense, which we're not expecting to happen anytime soon. As far as the Goldensphere goes, this can. There's still hope. And by the way, shout out to Mr. Cannon. That last one was pretty inspiring when it comes to solidarity and brotherhood. Now, my solidarity and brotherhood is based on, it is based on more than just a common look. Definitely it is. I mean, to a certain extent, I kind of resemble Mr. Cannon a little bit. Of course, I can tell us apart easily, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that my solidarity and brotherhood is actually based on, well, you saw the Kaaba in one of the videos I uploaded. And that's important. It is based on who's right. That's why it is that when it comes to black people's relationships with others, I usually side with black folk because other people do have a tendency to be unfair, consciously and subconsciously. So when it seems like I'm pro-black, even though I've said I'm pro-black male at this point, it's largely because, well, when it comes down to it, other groups may be, they will be unfair. And if I had no black blood in me at all, but I knew what I know now, I'd still go ahead and side with black folk when it comes to conflicts with other people. In the black relationship in America with the Asian community, we're right, they're wrong. They knew further mucking well that they were getting their butts kicked in these hate crimes by the Wyatts, and they wanted to try to present us as a threat to get a protection bill passed. And the protection bill was passed largely with the understanding that it would justify them, or it would bring harsher penalties and prosecutions when it was one of us. But we won't walk around beating up Asians. Just because we don't like them don't mean we walk around beating them up. We might do that to each other, beat someone up because we don't like them. And really, most of us as adults don't even do that. Now, Wyatts that are also racist, because every Wyatt is not a racist, I understand that. But Wyatts who are, they'll beat someone up because they don't like them. And they find an opportunity thinking they can get away with it. They'll do that. Other groups will do it to black folk. That's why you will find me support black against just about anybody else. They can disagree with our dysfunction. That's never why I jump on someone's throat or come for their neck. It is when they disagree with our dysfunction, but not their own. That's when I say, oh, you're treating the same dysfunction like it's worse in us than it is amongst you. Fit the guck out my face. You just like the way you sin more when you do the same sin, that's all. Then when it comes to within the black community, I'm pro-black male because, frankly, black men did not start this gender war, as I've been stating. Black men didn't do it. Even gay black men did not do it. You know the heterosexual black man didn't do it, didn't start this. Something she started. End of story. It's that simple. History bears it out. But then when it comes down to the relationship between the different complexions within the black community, I look and I say, well, you know what? After listening to even someone I can't stand and can't stand me, LSM and a non-black man. They did bring historical references to prove instances in which people were targeted. Now, sometimes these videos they brought didn't really specify that someone was attacked because of their shade. But there was one thing I could pick up on, and that is that sometimes they were attacked so suddenly, and it didn't make any sense. And I'd be like, wait a minute, I know people don't do this normally, but there were sometimes this happened even in my case. So I know what happened. I mean, I know it happens, but it was just so rare. Now I'm realizing, wait a minute, you know what? Sometimes these fights they showed they had nothing to do with color. Other times, it's pretty clear to me that it was, but it wasn't clear to every viewer. And I give them credit for that. And they even showed they showed evidence of actually being targeted for murders back in Louisiana and Texas in the early 1900s. They showed evidence for it. And it wasn't known who did those, but later on, something similar began to develop in Atlanta, and one of the survivors said, no, it was not even a white person that did the attack. Do you see where I'm going with this? So they brought some things to back it up, and I thought about it and realized, well, you know what? Actually, we don't have a history of being a bunch of sellouts in the United States. Where did that come from? And so that's when you will see me say, okay, you know, when it comes to this colorism, I'm going to say to the LS men and LS women, MLS men and MLS women, you and I did not start this. Our grandparents didn't. Our great-grandparents didn't. Oftentimes, our grandparents and great-grandparents weren't even MLS. But it wasn't MLS walking around starting these things in the United States. In other countries, you have to go to the historians for those countries. Maybe, maybe not. It depends on the country. It depends on the time. I'm not an expert on that. I did teach history at one point, but I'm not an expert on that. But the United States did not ever have in the black community that global colorism model in which light always wins out over dark at the darkest expenses. It's not like that in the United States within the black community. That wasn't the way it worked out. We were never the majority, for one, and that's usually the case. I mean, even in the Caribbean, people that are somewhat paler were never the majority, but also we weren't utilized to perform a buffer class per se. Those overseers on plantations were either white or black, and they were not picked on based on being lighter skinned black folk. They were either poor whites that needed a job and they would take it and they needed to feel bigger and better than somebody, or a loyal slave, whatever the shade. They just wanted to get close to the master, or he just wanted to have a relief from having to do the work himself, so he whipped somebody else to do it. But this idea that we were walking around here just selling out the rest of our people because, you know, that white blood it gave us the instinct to sell out our darker brethren and relatives is a fallacy. It's a lie. It's a stereotype. It's a false accusation. And that's why I say, okay, so you're being blamed for something. We're being blamed for something we didn't do. Damn sure not in the United States. And so you will see me side with you. That's what it's about. And so I want to say this with regard to the defense with which MLS men and MLS women are beginning to agree to do for each other. The common defense must be, I'm glad we have it. Don't get it wrong. I'm glad we got it. Especially multiracial movement and Exoticals United are examples of which I know. Oh, also, I think her name is LSP Golden Artist, if I'm not mistaken, and Fran Brown. Now, they have said we are willing to defend MLS men when they are falsely accused and stereotyped. And I'm willing to do the same for them. Because of that, I'm willing to step out, and that's how I learned about this. I'm willing to step out in defense of MLS women when you are blamed for, well, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I'm talking to you really in this case, but I know the ladies are listening. So when the ladies are blamed for things they did not do, and negatively stereotyped, unprovoked, and undeservedly, that is when we should be willing to defend them. Now, why am I saying this? This is a given, right? Of course, it is a given. What I'm saying is not morally objectionable. The issue is there are arguments they are having with other women that are against MLS or they're against what they perceive to be LS privilege. They're in arguments. And granted, I would be against the idea of an LS privilege, but I know that whatever meager existence it has is greatly offset by the penalties that the community levels every time it is perceived. I know it's greatly offset. That's why I don't really talk about it that much. A meager existence, a hell of an opposition. But getting back to the point, there are arguments about LS privilege with other women. And these arguments are centered around things that really are not substantial to us, like movie roles, media representation, modeling jobs, pedestalization, beauty contests, things like that. Come on, I'm Muslim. I'm not allowed to really get caught up in stuff like that. That's not what's important. Now, media representation, when it affects or promotes negative stereotyping, is something to be concerned about because of a real and moral, or rather immoral, effect that it can have. But just this symbolism is not substance. I don't give a guck about a movie role. Most of us are never going to get it. Those of us on YouTube ain't gonna get no movie roles. And we ain't gonna be paid what these actors are paid. That's not all. There's more. Modeling jobs, same thing. We ain't gonna be making that money. That's not all. There's more. One other thing that a lot of these ladies are going to be in an argument about, gentlemen, is going to be access to the wallets of men. The wallets they want of men they don't want. Now, they don't have to want any particular man. That's fine. We can still defend whoever's being falsely accused because they're being falsely accused, while still telling both sides in these arguments that the women are having to fuck the shuck up about our wallets until they're willing to drain our testes and fill our stomachs. We have every right to say that. Our money, our wallet, our choice. Their body, their choice. MLS men, it will actually be very important that you say this. Because when they get to arguing over your preference, number one, men don't usually get their preference. That's the first thing. Women don't usually get their preference because they're just hard to please. Men don't usually get our preferences because women are hard to please. You see, I'm not saying this out of hatred. I'm just saying that since that is what's going on, we have every right to say to them, hold up, if either side of you gets falsely accused, we don't mind defending you. Or let's say if either side of you gets falsely accused and is willing to defend us in that case, if it were reversed, we will defend you likewise. That's fine. By the same token, both of you can fuck the shuck up. Movie roles don't merely make that big of a difference for somebody else. Most people aren't actors, will never be paid what actors are paid. And secondly, stop arguing over access to our wallets if you're never going to argue over who gets to drain these testes first. That's fine. It's perfectly okay to say that. May even be necessary. Not because of hatred for either side in that argument, but it is because there are many things that even non-malicious women will forget, as I stated in my last one, when they don't even mean you any harm. They're just things they'll forget. And you may have to remind them. I mean, we all, those of us who have been married or been in long-term relationships, know that the women we love, we have to remind of very basic things they might forget at times. And there are times they'll have to do the same thing for us. I'm not saying this with malice. But just understand, gentlemen, we got to remember, and we may have to remind them, that the mutual defense to which we are coming to understand and gel between us must be based on substance and not symbol. That's what I'm getting at. We are arguing over the right to not be falsely accused of things that MLS people did not do, especially in the United States, and to not be negatively stereotyped because we're MLS, which is not a choice anyone makes except the Lord. That's the main moral heart and substance of this this agreement to defend each other. Just don't lose sight of it. If we think about it consciously, of course, we're going to come to this conclusion. I'm just saying, I'm reminding us, men, don't lose sight of it, and remind the ladies of it. Because when we sit up in and when we hear them argue, don't get it twisted. If we were to sit up here and argue with abundantly melanated brothers about MLS women's preference, MLS women would gladly stop and say, hold up, you don't argue over us like we're objects. We have a right to prefer. We have a right to pick what we prefer. And they would be right. I mean, and remember, in the manosphere, we're sitting up here and we're rightly saying that the sister's preference for the thug is immoral, and it is. But what's even worse than that is they're demanding, and their expectation and their demand that the non-thugs come and pick up the tab and rescue them from the consequences of their bad decisions with the thugs. We're rightly saying that. And when we say this, they argue with trope after trope after trope. Who hurt you? You just mad because you don't get done. You just mad because you beta and we can smell it. You just mad. They keep on doing that. I'm telling you, gentlemen. I'm telling you. They're not going to allow you to sit up here and argue over access to them as though you are entitled to any of it. They won't even let you argue over access to just not be chosen as targets to be used. You argue over that basic right of yours, and they will argue you down and smear you and slander your name as best they can. I'm talking about the manosphere and the gynocracy. So don't let anybody sit up here and argue over some supposed right to your wallet without going through your testes and your stomach. In other words, submitting to you sexually and non-sexually, preferably in a marriage, of course, but submitting to you sexually and non-sexually. Don't let them argue about that. And that's something you have to remind both sides about. Not that most of us are rich, it's not that, but still, that's something we have to remind both sides about. Because believe you me, you start arguing over some supposed right, even the same MLS women that are saying that you should give them a chance, and that's not wrong for them to ask you to do, nor is it wrong for us to ask of them, really. But even some of them that would say that don't want you arguing with abundantly melanated brothers over some supposed right to be with them, because then they say, wait a minute, what's with this right stuff? What's with this entitlement to be with me? Huh? And since they would do that, because this is not a guaranteed right, we're going to have to remind them at times, hold up. My wallet is not a guaranteed right. And even my defense of you when you're blamed for things you didn't do is not a right until you've shown that you were going to do the same thing for me, which you have shown, and that's why I'm here defending you when they get on you about those things. It's just being fair. I hope I didn't go too fast to go over anybody's head. Thank you for listening. You all heard the call to prayer. It's time for me to go. Till the next time, black heart, black mind, blackout.